You can probably tell by that music that today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite wrestlers personally, and someone who I feel has always been underutilized. That's right, we're talking about the Father of the Year, Christian. What's going on, everyone? It's Chris, and I am back with episode 36 of What Could Have Been in Wrestling. This week's topic comes thanks to Johnny Delgado 98, who has been responsible for the last couple topics, actually. And he wanted me to talk about what if Christian had re-signed in the fall of 2005 and didn't go to TNA. So let's just get right into it, and let's actually start more towards the beginning of 2005. Towards the end of his run, he had been engaged in a feud with the then WWE champion, John Cena. And this had started back at the Royal Rumble that year, where when they were picking their numbers, they got into a little bit of a battle rap. And Christian said he was Captain Charisma, read it and weep, and he was going to throw Cena out for all of his peeps. And Cena came back, obviously, basically put him in check, and won the rap battle, and that was it for now. As the months went on in post-WrestleMania, we went towards Backlash, and this is where I really feel Christian's popularity started to rise. He had been doing the Captain Charisma gimmick, and even though he didn't have a match, he did come out to address the upcoming draft that was going to be happening, and he was talking about the backlash that would be taking place if Christian was moved off of Raw. He went on again to recite a rap that he had written up. First, he was mocking Triple H and Ric Flair, saying their legend still grows, 26 titles between them, and the world's biggest nose. He also talked about Batista with his muscles to spare, but he has charisma like Tomko's got hair. And then he finally went to the guy he really wanted to focus on, the one who inspired that rap, and he focused his attention again on John Cena, which drew a really good reaction. And this is, like I said, where he really seemed to start coming into his own, and his popularity was becoming more noticeable. He said, "Hey Cena, you think I'm so jealous of your fortune and fame? You talk like you're Snoop Dogg, but you look like Corey Haim." Then he said if it's Raw with Ross or SmackDown with Cole, he was going to be champion, and he ended it with his catchphrase, "Because that's how I roll." And on top of obviously the comedy segment and showing that he really does have a ton of charisma, fans were really starting to get behind him. The whole CLB situation, moniker they had given him, and the Captain Charisma gimmick were really starting to work, and I really think that he could have been in line for a big push. Now let's go to that draft I had mentioned. And ironically enough, the first pick of the draft for Raw was then WWE champion, like I said, John Cena. And he went over from SmackDown to Raw and debuted on Chris Jericho's highlight reel. Of course, the man that comes out to confront him, along with his problem solver Tomko, is Christian. And they get again verbally spar, engage in their war of words. And Cena's obviously able to throw back and call him a CLB, a creepy little bastard, and also gives him a throwback with a 5-second pose. Christian gets his licks in and talks about Cena being on Raw, but also talks about how he should be the #1 contender, and how Cena's nothing more than a poser. Things break down, of course, and they degenerate into a brawl, and it ends with Cena and Jericho was a face still at this point, brawling with Christian and Tomko and clearing the ring. And with that, it looked like we were going to have a one-on-one match between Cena and Christian for the title at their upcoming pay-per-view, Vengeance. However, later that night, there was a tag match on Raw between Cena and Jericho going against Christian and Tomko. And after Cena and Jericho win, Jericho attacks John Cena from behind, takes him to the outside and leaves him laying, throwing him into the steps and putting him in the walls of Jericho. And of course, later on, he's added to the match, and it's a triple threat match. That, I think, was the first mistake with Christian. I think when you have a guy who's getting more popular and getting more notoriety, and has proven that he can go in the ring, I don't think you need to add Chris Jericho in there as a buffer, especially because Jericho was leaving in a matter of months. As a side note, I know that Christian said that was the catalyst for him to leave and go to TNA, because he realized when he was talking to Chris Van Vliet, he realized he was only going to get to a certain level in WWE, and the fact that he didn't get a one-on-one match is what really told him that, because they had added Jericho in for really no reason. So the first thing I would have done there is I would have changed that Vengeance match from the triple threat match to a one-on-one match, which is what it should have been in my opinion. Cena and Christian could have had their match, and obviously Cena was the star on the rise at the time, and Christian wouldn't have won, but I think he would have given a good accounting for himself, especially as the veteran of the match. He could have led a younger John Cena, who was still pretty raw at that time, to a very good match, ending with an FU by Cena and a clean victory. Going forward from there, again, to relegate Christian, he was drafted over to SmackDown, and yes, he was in a 4-way to crown the new SmackDown champion, because Batista hadn't been drafted over to SmackDown as of yet, so there was no champion on their show. But after that, he was really relegated to mid-card feuds and really wasn't thought about again. Yes, they did give him the Peep Show to have his own segment, and in that situation, again, he was placed in a mid-card feud, I know, with the Mexicools, and there wasn't really much left they did with him, and maybe it's because they did think he might have been leaving. So again, with him not really being utilized as a main event guy outside of that one time in Vengeance, I can understand why he left, but in this situation, if he re-signs, here's how I would play it out. First of all, I would have him still challenge Batista for the World Heavyweight title and have Batista as a guest on the Peep Show. And obviously, why he wouldn't win, because Batista was the other new star they were looking to elevate. I think they'd still have a very good match, because they did have a good match on SmackDown. And instead of JBL interfering, I think it could have been a clean win for Batista to establish his character, but also for Christian to have a good accounting for himself. Now, with that match happening closer to the fall and closer to the end of his contract, obviously there might have been basically some speculation of what he's going to do, and if Vince had felt he was going to leave, there is a reason to relegate him and not put him in a main event role. I do understand that. But if he re-signs here, I don't want him staying on SmackDown. I want him moving back over to Raw. So they can actually make it into more of a storyline that his contract was coming up for renewal, similar to what they did years later with CM Punk. And you can have it where they announce that Christian actually has not re-signed and is no longer a member of SmackDown. Because like I said, I want him back over on Raw. And how you can do that post the Batista match is you can have him actually make a surprise appearance on a certain talk show. Because like I said, while Christian had the Peep Show, since Jericho left at the end of the summer that year and was fired by Eric Bischoff, they didn't have the highlight reel anymore, and instead Edge, who was dealing with an injury at the time, was given his own segment on Raw called The Cutting Edge. And as a surprise guest, you can have Christian come out. And Christian could come out and surprise Edge and let him know that he's re-signed his contract, but this time as a member of the Raw roster, and he's back on Mondays. He can talk to Edge and tell him that he understands that he wants to be champion, but he can also tell him that who was the team captain when they were the 7-time champions, and who should really be the one main eventing, because even though Edge had his Money in the Bank contract, Christian can still lay claim that he's been the one who was headlining against Cena, and he just needs, like he did against Orton, one more match to prove that he can become the WWE champion. And what you can have there is you can have Christian challenging Edge for his Money in the Bank contract in a match that night. Eric Bischoff can then come out and instead of making it a one-on-one match, he can actually, for the Money in the Bank contract, he can actually remind it that Edge did win that fairly at Mania. And he can say that while he understands that everyone on the roster, if he addresses everyone, wants a chance to be the world champion, he can say that the man who just re-signed with Raw is still, in his eyes, the number one contender. And if Edge feels otherwise, he can take Christian on that night. And in that situation, instead of it being for the Money in the Bank contract, you can just have a number one contenders match on Raw between Edge and Christian. And in that situation, in one of the biggest wins of Christian's career, I think Christian should go over Edge. Reason being is because Edge still had the Money in the Bank contract, so he still had his guaranteed title shot, so he wouldn't need just another one for no reason. And I think it could have helped elevate Christian a little bit more, and even higher than he might have been perceived when he did that triple threat match against Cena and Jericho. So now, again, Christian has his match against Cena, and the way it can work out there is I actually think that, and obviously it wouldn't still be a great ending for Christian, he can get a match with Cena on Raw the very next week, and it would still, unfortunately for him, be the same outcome, where Cena could, even though there might be some moments of doubt, Cena can still hit Christian with an FU, or at this point, because I know he was close to debuting after Cyber Sunday, the STF, he could have been the first one that, he could have been a victim, one of the first victims that is Christian of the STFU, and he could have lost by tap out this time. Where Cena, still being booked as a strong champion, because remember he held the belt for almost a year in his first reign, would cleanly defeat Christian twice and be able to conclude that feud successfully, and then probably move on to feuding more with Kurt Angle at that point. So that's actually where I'm going to end it for Christian in terms of what he could have been doing post that situation, post that Cena feud. That's definitely up in the air. I think that definitely, though, an Edge and Christian reuniting would have happened. Probably post Royal Rumble. I think it would have gone more into 2006. And I think you could have had him actually working with Edge again, and I think you would have seen another tag title reign, and it might have actually delayed the formation of Rated RKO at that point. And also, I still think that unfortunately for Christian, even if he did resign, he'd still be relegated to that mid-card status because of how Vince perceived him. Vince never looked at Christian as a main event player. It was very well established in his 2011 run as world champion. After he won it, he lost it to Orton just 5 days later in that match on SmackDown. And it was confirmed because Vince never looked at Christian as a long-term champion and as someone he'd want to have as a main eventer. So in my opinion, he probably did make the right decision going to TNA, even though it's more of a minor league organization. It still gave him more notoriety, and he was still able to become the TNA champion by defeating Jeff Jarrett. So he still had a world title reign, actually 2 of them, in his 3 years there. Additionally, with Christian, even post-WWE leaving the second time, honestly, I think now, just as a side note, I think he's still doing his best work as the leader of the patriarchy in AEW. I love all of his segments, and he's still been able to come into his own, and I think he's proven week after week with the best segments that he is a guy that in his younger time, 20 years ago in 2005, he is someone you could have built, maybe not Raw, but you could have built SmackDown around as the top heel in the company. So that's where I'm going to leave it. So I know it doesn't go too far into him re-signing. Like I said, if you'd like me to do a part 2, talking about how he could reunite with Edge and reform Edge and Christian, I'm happy to do that. But like I said, I just wanted to talk about how he should have been handled up to his time being re-signed, and also how he could have gotten finally a one-on-one title match with Cena and have a very big victory in his career over Edge, who was on his way to his first title reign just months later. So drop a comment down below. Let me know what you think. Let me know how you think Christian would have been handled had he re-signed with WWE in 2005. And if you think he made the right move going to TNA in general. Thanks everyone again for all your comments on all your videos and topic suggestions. Please keep them coming. I'll be sure to get to them. Again, thank you to everyone for also who's liked and subscribed. Please continue to do that as I'm trying to get to 4,000 subscribers by the end of this summer. And I'll be back soon with another episode of What Could Have Been in Wrestling, and also more of the match analysis series. Thanks a lot, everyone.